Because Great Western Railway was originally constructed to broad gauge, 7 foot and a quarter inch, as opposed to the usual standard gauge. This, however, is unfortunately not modelled as much as it might be, especially in the smaller scales. And this video is looking at the process to make some of the broad gauge models available courtesy of Newman Miniatures. The broad gauge items are for the most part virtually the same as those for standard gauge when it comes to assembly, weight, painting, etc. There are, however, a few small variations which I'm going to show you in this video. The first one, understandably, are wheels. So here we have the main parts required. As you can see, I personally recommend Pecco wagon wheels wherever possible, simply because being plastic, they're easier to cut in half. We also then need an axle extension. Here I have just a piece of thin tubing. This is 12.5 millimeters across. That's the measurement which I find works best for the Pecco wheels, but at the end of the day the important thing is that you get a gauge of 14 millimeters. I've used cotton wool buds in this particular case, but we do also provide on the site 3D printed ones for ease if required. So it's quite simple really. All you need to do is just cut in half, slot the ends in as you see here, and it goes straight in. The only other thing which I would recommend as far as the wheels are concerned is that because we have of course got plastic pins, making sure that the axle boxes have been properly drilled out, and similarly using a 1.5 millimeter drill bit to create some slight countersinking on the inside, as you can potentially see, overall makes for a smoother fit and finish. Moving on to the driving wheels for these engines. In this particular case, North Star is a single, only has one pair of driving wheels. And for these, I'm using the driving wheels from a Graham Farish Royal Scot. You can see we have the set here, only the one is required. Now, the fitting of these is pretty simple. Ultimately, the connection pin just needs to be unscrewed and the mounting for it sanded down. And if I just show, the axle can be unplugged quite easily. You'll see that there are little plastic plugs at each end. These are for insulating the wheel in operation on the original model, but the joy is they expand the hole out in the centre of the wheel set to just perfect for a 2 millimeter axle, or in this case I've used a piece of cocktail stick. And so once regauged to 14 millimeters, it is quite simply a case of putting it straight in position like so. The second important part, different to the standard gauge models, is track. Now, here we have an example of the dual gauge sleeper ring as it comes. You'll see I've already put in one example of rail. That's what we're going to be covering now. They may need cleaning out, in which case a pin and a scalpel, just to make sure that the freeways are appropriately clear, is recommended, but these are designed to be as simple as possible. All you need to do is paint them up. Obviously I'm showing this one clear. Take your rail, I have a short example piece here, and simply slot it straight in. Now sometimes it will be a bit stiffer than others, so a pair of pliers can help, but that gives you a perfect 14 millimeter gauge, and you'll notice that there is a third one, so you can get perfect standard gauge. As an example, here is some of the straight track ready completed. And if I just take the wheeled coach minus roof, you'll see that gives a perfectly smooth ride to it. Lastly, we have couplings. Now, for the most part, this is the same as with the standard gauge engines. There are locating points already provided, or if there's space, you can use any end pockets, as you can see on the second class coach here. There are, however, 3 holes for each of these. The reason is quite simple. For the most part, you're going to want to use the centre ones as you see here. However, because At present, the main motorising units are standard gauge. The Great Western towards the end most certainly ran mixed gauge trains, and so it's entirely prototypical. A central coupling in broad gauge is non-compatible with a central coupling in standard gauge. Therefore, depending on which side the dual gauge is, you can offset a coupling to the left or right, which then places it in perfect alignment for standard gauge track. And the result is that you can run, I just bring in a standard gauge example, decidedly later in period, admittedly. Move these along. Standard gauge can go straight on like so, and the broad gauge like so. This wagon therefore is in effect acting as a barrier wagon between the two different gauges. With the wheels, track and coupling sorted, the only real differences between the broad and standard gauge models in the Newman Miniatures range, we now have a completed working broad gauge engine. I hope that this video has shown just how simple it can be to make these models, and hopefully might encourage you to consider this lesser modelled but very iconic and very aesthetic part of our railway history. Thank you for watching.